Hi, this is Ken Shank, coming to you live from a remote location in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm wanting to talk in this video about the book of James in the New Testament. Book of James is a very popular book for many people. Some think of it as the Proverbs of the New Testament. It has plenty of little nuggets of wisdom that can be, put on a memory verse card or on a wall, or can be recited from memory. Great verses throughout the book of James, and lots of great truths that are just as applicable today as they ever were. So let's dive in. When we hit James in the New Testament, we hit another section, kind of. Hebrews is often grouped together with the general epistles. But when we hit James, we hit what are called the general epistles, sometimes called the Catholic epistles, not because they were produced by the Vatican, but because the older sense of the word Catholic is universal. So if we call them the general epistles or the general letters, then we have a good sense that these are letters that don't have a specific church as its audience, but are more addressing a broader sweep of churches. By the way, if you've never heard the word epistle before, an epistle in the ancient world was a more formal or more general letter. So a letter, I might write my mother a letter, but an epistle I might write to the church today. Some scholars debate whether we should call these general epistles or general letters, but probably we can leave that for another class, another day. Why are they general? Well, we see that their audience are general. James is written to the tribes scattered throughout the nations. We can debate whether he means, is he just addressing Jews, or is he addressing, all Christians? My tendency is to think that he's addressing all believers, but that, in a sense, Gentiles are incorporated into Israel, as it were. I think that's probably more true than not, that the earliest Christians thought of Gentile believers as being incorporated into true Israel, rather than the church being some new entity beyond Israel, or a third race, as one later Christian put it. I don't think most of the early Christians, certainly I don't think James, thought of the church as something outside of Israel. That doesn't fit his M.O. In the book of Galatians or the book of Acts. So I do think that the idea that by the 12 tribes, Gentiles are being in some way incorporated within Israel, that fits. First Peter is to believers all over Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, so it has a general audience. Second Peter is to everyone of like precious faith, if I remember correctly. So it is to everyone. And Jude is to everyone who's beloved by the Lord and called. So you can see that all of these books have a bigger audience than a single church or a single city, and thus general letters or general epistles. 1st, 2nd, 3rd John are in this section of the New Testament, but they aren't really general epistles because they are to specific audiences. 1st John may actually be a sermon. So, there, general epistles. But this is a video about James, so let me launch into James. James, who was this James? This James is the half-brother of Jesus. Of course, it's important in some circles, especially Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic, it's important for them to say that he was a cousin of Jesus, because of the perpetual virginity of Mary is important for them. As a Protestant, I'm not particularly worried about this point. If James were a cousin, when I get to heaven, I find out James was a cousin, I'll shrug my shoulders and say, huh, who knew? But I really think the most natural way, sometimes we do these kind of round up the usual suspects. We kind of play these games to try to harmonize our theology, and maybe that's appropriate for particular groups. This is not an issue that I feel like I need to iron out. I have no problem. I don't view sex as dirty at all in the proper context. And so I don't see Mary as being in some way defiled or made impure if she had children after Jesus. In fact, I think that's erroneous way of thinking. So I have no problem with calling James the half-brother of Jesus, meaning that he is a son of Mary born after Jesus is born, of Mary as a virgin. Now, some think that James and these other brothers and sisters might be from an earlier marriage of Joseph, but anyway, I'll just leave it at that. There are other Jameses in the New Testament. There's James, the son of Zebedee, the brother of John. John, the traditionally considered the beloved disciple. There's James, the son of Alphaeus. But tradition, and we have no reason to doubt that the James behind James is the half-brother of Jesus. I need to discipline myself not to go off on these side footnotes. Now, some think of the book of James as a collection of James's general teaching, probably collected after his death, rather than a book straightforwardly written by him. Some people feel very uncomfortable with this. I don't think that this is contrary to inerrancy or anything. It just basically says that someone collected James's teaching at some point. I mean, it could have happened while he was alive. Why would anybody think this? I suppose there's a very Greek feel to the book of James. Now, of course, Stanley Porter and others have done a lot to argue that Greek was very common in Palestine at the time of Jesus, and I'm not in any way arguing against that line of thought. This might be, however, let me just suggest this might be another situation where the most obvious conclusion, well, this is really good Greek for someone who spoke Aramaic as a first language. Maybe this is a collected translation of James's teaching rather than something he sat down and wrote word for word. Is that the most obvious conclusion? Maybe it's not. I'm not a James expert. I'm just saying this, that I think sometimes we eliminate options for no reason. There's no good reason for us to eliminate the options just because of certain ideas and traditions we have in our heads. Anyway, I'm not going to argue one way or the other. If James penned this in Greek, then it would have to be fairly early. Now, I've heard some people suggest that maybe this is actually the first writing in the New Testament. I don't think it's the first writing because I think that James responds to a perversion of Paul. It seems to me, again, what is the most natural conclusion? So many of us come up with possible conclusions because the most probable conclusion doesn't fit with our moorings, our traditions. And so we apply great intellect sometimes to try to come up with alternative explanations. Maybe I'm just stupid. I just think we should basically go with what the most likely or most probable reading seems to be. And it just seems to me the most likely reading of James 2 is that James is engaging some, not Paul directly, but some twisted version of Paul. Because I don't think what James is combating in James 2 is a accurate version of Paul. And so I think James is combating a twisted version of Paul. But anyway, if that's true, if James is addressing misrepresentations of Paul out there, then that would require James to have been written at least in the late 50s, after Paul wrote things like Galatians. If Romans was written in 57 or 58, if I'm not saying that James is post-Romans, but if it were, then it would have to be, kind of around the year 60, because James dies about 62 at the hands of the high priest Ananus. He has him stoned. It's a tricky politics here. The Roman procurator Festus, who's mentioned in the book of Acts, Paul appears before Festus. So Festus dies, and while the replacement, Albinus, is underway, the high priest seizes the opportunity to get the Sanhedrin together, and they vote to stone James, and James is stoned to death. So anyway, there's a little background on James. I'm not going to take a position on this other than I think James has to have been written 50 to 62 if James is directly writing it. So anyway, key verse of James. The key verse of James, I think, is James 1:17. Every good and every perfect gift is coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. I think one of the key conflicts in James is, who are you going to rely on? Where are you going to be centered as a person? Are you going to be centered in this world, or are you going to be centered in God and in the world, that is coming? Friendship with the world, James says, is hatred toward God. And so I think James is trying to de-center Christians everywhere away from what they can see. And of course, one of the things they can see is the people who have money right in front of them. So this person I can see right in front of me wants to give me money if I do certain things. And if I will rely on this patron right in front of me, I have visible money. And I think that James is saying we need to rely on the true patron, which is God. God is our true patron. God is the giver of all truly good gifts. We need to forget about relying on the visible resources down here. We need to forget about worldly interests and worldly moorings, and we need to depend on God as the giver of all true gifts. And the ancient world was a patron-client kind of world. People got around in life by relying on those who had, and those who didn't have relied on those who had. And there were sometimes informal strings attached to these sorts of. And by the way, the word for a propensity to give is grace, and a gift. The word grace and gift are actually very related in Greek. Grace is charis, the propensity to give, or to be gracious is to have a propensity to give, and then a charisma is a gift that has been given. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about grace in its Greco-Roman context. Yes, it didn't come with any formal strings attached, but you would not insult a patron who's giving you grace and expect to continue to receive the gift. So it was not formally conditioned, but there were expectations, informal expectations of gifts, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding here about the nature of grace from God. Yes, grace is unmerited favor, but that doesn't mean, certainly no ancient person would have understood what you were talking about if you'd said, no, you can't solicit grace. I think they would have said, why not? Of course you can solicit grace. You can ask for a gift from a giver. Of course you can. And also the idea that it's unmerited favor doesn't mean that there might not have been expectations of it. The key to grace is the disproportionality. The key to grace is that the gift is much greater than anything one might do to solicit the grace. So there are kind of false assumptions about how grace and giving worked in the Greco-Roman world that largely has flowed out of the arguments of the Protestant Reformation. So the idea that God would have expectations of us and that his justification and so forth would still be a gift, those fit together quite fine. Similarly, the idea that grace might at some point end if one did not respond with graciousness and gratitude to the giver, again, that fits perfectly well within the Greco-Roman understanding of grace and giving. So I do think this key verse of James clues us into the idea that we need to be relying on God as the one who provides for our needs, not on the visible wealthy around us, for example. So James has some words to Christian leaders. One of the most relevant, I think, is in James chapter 3. He says, don't be many teachers, because we will be held to a higher standard. So I'm sure I'm going to have to wear a dunce cap. Even though I'm only a few minutes into this video, I bet I'm going to have to wear a dunce cap in the kingdom, for some of the stupid things I've said already. I wish I knew which ones were stupid, so that I could not say them again. But basically, James says to watch your tongues. Be careful what you say. There's great teaching here for all of us. How many times have we said something, and as we saw the words leaving our mouth, we thought, oh, I wish I could take that back. James says the person who can control their tongue, that's a perfect person. And I sense that. I hear that. I feel that pain. Don't show favoritism to rich people. It's not popular at all right now in evangelical circles to point out that the New Testament really has nothing positive to say about wealth. There is very little, or let me put it this way, the overwhelming thrust of the New Testament in relation to wealth is negative. And James is very negative toward wealth. Once again, we're uncomfortable with an idea, and we apply considerable intellect to try to get out of something that seems pretty obvious, like, quote, "Woe to you rich people." Oh, okay, well, there you have it. Now, of course, applying it today, it's true. Applying it today, circumstances are different today than they were in the first century. So, for example, the first century functioned with a sense of limited good. The idea of a limited good is the idea of what's called a zero-sum game. It would be like if I came into class with 20 apples, and I gave an apple to everyone in the class, and then when we left class, if one student had all 20 of the apples, that would mean that the other students didn't. In a sense of limited good, or in a zero-sum economy, then if one person has more, then it naturally implies that another person has less. And this is the way the economy basically was, for the most part, at the time of the Roman Empire. And so there's an Arab proverb that says every rich person is either a thief or the son of a thief. And that's the way they generally thought about wealth at the time of Jesus. Now, I don't believe it's that way today. And so there is a legitimate contextualizing of the biblical message today. Because in the kind of economy we have today, for one person to have a certain amount doesn't mean that another person has less. So we have to take that difference between that time and our time into account when applying scriptures like this. But James has a very negative view toward those who have wealth, because they're basically viewed as hoarders in the New Testament time. These are people who have and don't give. These are people who see those in need around them but don't help. These are people who use their resources for their own pleasure while other people suffer. That's the way James's world thought of wealth. And so today we have to come up with contextualized principles for our world. John Wesley had a great saying, earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. And what he meant basically is that you should try your best to prosper materially in this world, not over the backs of others, not while hurting others, not while neglecting others, but that if you have if you have the gift of say writing books. Wesley had the gift of writing books, and he made lots and lots of money from the books that he wrote. Of course, he gave almost all of it away, and so Wesley would say it's not in the earning in our world that the evil or the sin is. It's in what you do with the resources that you get, and that God blesses you with. When Wesley said save all you can, he meant don't buy a Lamborghini when you can do with a Ford Fiat or whatever, some cheap car. What he meant by save was not put it in the bank, but be frugal in the way that you use your money, and then of course give all you can. Once your needs are satisfied, why not give that extra above what you need to subsist back to others? Well, all of that is to say is James is very harsh toward the rich, and he's writing in a particular context for his time. Applying it to our time is going to require us to get together as Christians and pray and ask the Holy Spirit to help us know how to represent those principles and those truths in our world. The wealthy are again, there's some really harsh words. In 4:13 through 17, he talks about the rich merchant who says, "Ooh, I'm going to go make some money in that town. Ooh, and then I'm going to go make some money in that town." Kind of reminds us of the words of Jesus in the parable of the what's it called? The parable of the guy who says, I'm going to tear down this barn and build bigger ones, so that I can store more. And Jesus says, don't you know that today, this day, your life will be required of you? And so there's some harsh words here about the person who is only thinking about going from town to town to make money. And then in 5:1-6, James is pretty direct about the wealthy. Indeed, in 2:6 he says, aren't the wealthy the ones who are causing you problems in your churches? Don't show favoritism. Just because someone walks into your gathering and they're rich, you don't give them a special seat. Don't make some poorer person stand because the rich person has walked in. Yes, James says that. We got to deal with it. We can't just skirt it under the rug, even though our context is different. God has chosen the poor in the world to be rich in faith and as heirs of the kingdom. Well, James is bound to make us uncomfortable. Again, applying the Bible to today is not a X marks the spot kind of science. We have to it takes community of faith to get from that time to our time. But these are words that are hard for us to hear in this day and age. Now, James has a lot to say to believers in general. For one thing, James seems to be writing in a context where times are tough. And we're pretty much, he's writing Christians everywhere. But basically, times are tough enough for Christians that James can say to everybody, consider trials to be a joy. That's tough. Consider trials a joy. He basically says that trials build our character. They build our patience. They build our endurance. So try to think of the trials you're going through as a growing opportunity rather than a horrible thing. Also, remember when you're tested or tempted, don't switch teams. There are two teams here. And the double-minded person is the person that can't decide which team they're going to be on. Don't be worried. If you have a sensitive conscience, don't be worried about the verse that says the person who doubts, is a double-minded person, unstable in all their ways. Don't worry about that if you're the kind of person that has fleeting thoughts. This is about something bigger than just passing thoughts through your head or temptations. Indeed, James distinguishes temptation from sin. It's when temptation conceives, it's when desire has conceived that it gives birth to sin. Being tempted in and of itself is not a sin. Being tempted to lust is not a sin if you don't go on to lust. Being tempted to say something hurtful to another person in and of itself is not sin. It's when you choose, to say it. Being tempted by another person sexually, whether of the same sex or the opposite sex, the temptation is not the sin. The sin is when either your mind or your body makes a choice. Sin involves choice when it comes to the sin that is of most concern to God in the New Testament. You can wrong a person unintentionally, but there's virtually no discussion of unintentional sin in the New Testament. Almost all of the New Testament is focused on conscious choices to do wrong and the temptation to do wrong in and of itself is not sin. And so James is not talking about passing thoughts or desires. He's talking about who's your master? Whose team are you on? Are you on God's team or are you on the world's team? God does offer wisdom in trial if you really want it. If anyone lacks wisdom, and this is in the context of considerate joy when you enter into trials, if you want wisdom, ask God. He freely gives it. But make sure you want it. Because there's a certain person that they may ask you for advice, but they're not going to take it. They don't really want your advice because they're not going to take it even when you give them good advice. There are people like that. And so God has advice to give us when we go into trial. If we really want it, He'll give it to us. But God also knows if we're really just going through the motions. We really don't want to change. We really are looking for some way to justify what we're already doing. That kind of person God's not going to worry too much about giving that person wisdom because they really don't want it. Don't love the world. Again, very strong. Love not the things, nor the world, nor the things in the world. And this part in chapter 3 and chapter 4 tells us what this is. What does it mean to love the world? It means to be oriented around your own pleasure. How can what's going to make me happy? What's going to make me have pleasure? And that is so prevalent in the world today. It's all about me, me. What can I do? Well, that's just not going to be good for me. Selfish ambition It's okay to want to excel, to want to be all you can be for the Lord. That's good. But when you do it by running over other people and have selfish ambition, God will have nothing to do with that. Especially the selfish ambition that leads to fighting other people because you're trying to step on top of them to get ahead. God will have none of that. That has nothing to do with God. Bitter envy, where you're upset that someone else got an advance that you didn't, or someone's smarter than you, or someone has something that you don't have. And of course, the kind of pride that competes with our honor to God. We're all complete idiots. Every single human being is a complete whoop, 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 when it comes to God. I mean, God is so far beyond us in every respect, and yet we think we have it all figured out. This is why I'm going to have a dunce cap, because I actually think I can do a video on James. Who are you, Skank? These are the kinds of things that James suggests are loving the world, and they are hostile toward the love of God. Of course, another element of James is this idea, don't be people who just know what you're supposed to do. Be people who actually do what you're supposed to do. And this, of course, was the part of James that Martin Luther really didn't like. When Martin Luther first translated the Bible into German, his first time around, he didn't translate James. He considered it an epistle of straw. And it's largely because of this slide right in front of you. Luther was upset at the idea of justification by works. And so what he did is he created an extreme version of justification by faith that isn't found in the New Testament. It's not found in Paul. James and Paul don't contradict each other. They did in Luther's mind, because he created this sense of workless faith that was so far beyond anything the New Testament authors would have imagined. Now, in this section, it sounds like James is dealing with a perversion of Paul. As I just said, I don't actually think he contradicts Paul, because Paul talks about fruit. Paul talks about fulfilling the law by loving your neighbors yourself. In Romans 3:31, Paul says, do we therefore make void law through faith? No, we affirm law. Paul affirmed law, but the law he affirmed was the law of love, and he affirmed that we could keep the law of love only through the power of the Holy Spirit. But it was important for us to have fruit. And in fact, Ephesians, the famous verse, by grace you've been saved through faith, not of works, so that no one can boast. The very next verse says that we were created for good works in Christ. Paul is not anti-works, not in the slightest. He just doesn't think that things like circumcision or food laws or Sabbath observance are going to make anybody right with God. Paul even does what James does here. Paul critiques in Romans 2 those who are just hearers of the law, not doers of the law. And so when James says things like faith without works is dead, he's targeting people for whom faith is just a head belief. You believe in your head that there's only one God? Well, that's nice. The demons have that much faith, but they're still pretty scared. So that kind of faith is not going to get somebody right with God, and Paul would agree with that. The kind of faith that Paul believes in is a confession that Jesus is Lord. And when you confess someone as Lord, you're saying, this is the King. This is the King. If the King tells me to jump out this 23rd story window I'm in, then I'm going to do it because the King is my Lord. And that's something more than, yes, I believe Jesus is Lord. Can I get my free gift now? That's not faith, according to Paul. And James targets this perversion of Paul's teaching by saying that if you have faith that doesn't have works, that's useless faith. And in fact, he goes so far in 2:24 to say a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. Their works show that their faith is actually living work. By the way, Paul doesn't say that we're justified by faith alone. Martin Luther said we're justified by faith alone. Paul says we're justified by faith and not by works of law. And so James goes on to say it's not enough just to keep one commandment. Well, I haven't killed anybody, so I can have an affair on this side. No, Paul says you're guilty of the whole law if you commit one of them. And that phrase has been I think misunderstood. I think what James is basically saying here is that it's not enough just to say, well, I'm really good at not murdering people. That's not, God wants us to not commit adultery and not to covet and not to steal. God wants us to be righteous in the full sense, not just in one little narrow kind of sense. Now, if I seem to be wreaking havoc with Protestant sensibilities, remember that Protestantism is a tradition that started in the 1500s. I'm talking about the Bible here. Okay, he also says, as we end the book of James, to be patient in suffering. Again, we get this sense that Christianity at large is undergoing a time of suffering. He reminds Christians everywhere that the Lord is coming. Remember Job. Job was somebody who was patient in suffering. Remember Elijah. God does miracles. There's some interesting stuff on the sick here. James makes a connection that some people are sick because of their sin. That's a very interesting connection. I don't think we should conclude, I think it'd be very wrong to conclude that everybody who's sick is sick because of their sin. But there might be some people who actually are sick as a result of their sin. And James ends on a very high note that we need to bring those who are going astray back. That if you bring someone back from sinning, then you will save them from death. Now, I'm not 100% sure what kind of death James has in mind. He could mean physical death, because remember, he's been talking about how the person who's sick, may be sick because of their sin. So you can see where if somebody's sinning and it's leading to sickness, then if you stop them from sinning, then you stop them from sickness potentially. So it could be that. Of course, as a Wesleyan, I believe the broader truth is true as well, that a person can go on a path away from God to where they may, if they keep on that path of walking away from God, that they could actually walk to where, they die spiritually. And in that sense, that's an even more powerful sense that we need to make sure, or again, it's their choice. If God has given people free will, you can't make someone be saved. But certainly we can pray for them, and certainly we can lovingly and tactfully intercede, and perhaps, just maybe, save some souls from eternal death. This is the book of James. What a wonderful book. Read it.